Hello there, welcome back to Jenny Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. Today I'm using an Altenew layering stamp set, but I'm going to be using the outline images only, and I will be coloring the tulips, or the tulip pieces, in this stamp set, and then creating a Mother's Day card. It's going to be here before I know it. I have a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Silver White cardstock. This is half of a sheet of paper. I'm going to line up the stamps on the paper. I will ink them up with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. It is alcohol marker, Copic marker friendly. About the card assembly, I'm going to be using an old Stampin' Up! Die set to create kind of a Polaroid picture of the tulips. I'm using some pattern paper and some bits and bobs from my Shaker Bit and Bob collection. I am trying to use the things I have this year. So now that we've talked about the coloring, let's jump into the crime. Our alphabetical journey today, words are hard, takes us to Maine. And I realized that last week we went to Missouri, and that's because I don't know why. Somehow I went from Louisiana to Missouri, and in the moment, that was absolutely alphabetical. I only skipped about 4 states. Anyway, so we're backing up the train. We're taking a pit stop in Maine. Maine was one of the first areas of the United States explored by British explorers, and originally Maine was actually part of Massachusetts. Following the Revolutionary War, there was a petition by the residents to separate themselves from Massachusetts and create their own state. This also was occurring at the time that there was contention between anti- and pro-slavery states. Missouri was also attempting their run at statehood, like we talked about last week. And in an attempt to maintain the status quo, the Missouri Compromise was enacted, allowing both Missouri and Maine to join the Union, one as a free state, one as a slave state. So on March 15th, 1820, oh my goodness, I can't remember if it's 1820 or 1802. 1820, March 15th, 1820, there we go. Maine was admitted to the Union as the 23rd state, with Missouri following along about a year later. Now, Maine is the largest state in area of the New England states. There are 4,000 islands off the coast of Maine, and Maine has 3,478 miles of coastline. I didn't know Maine was that big. Lobster is Maine, right? And the annual lobster yield is almost 100 million pounds. Maine is home to LL Bean and a giant size 410 boot statue at company headquarters. Maine is the first state in the Union to see the sunrise and is the closest state to the continent of Africa. Maine is home to the first sawmill established in 1623 and boasts to be the home of the best boat builders in the world. Lobster isn't the only cash crop. Maine produces 90% of the country's blueberries annually, and Maine is the location of the sea captain's wife's murder. That was a mouthful. Our story today takes place in coastal Maine in the 1870s, and the information or the details were kind of sparse. In fact, some of the information I did find contradicted itself. But I'm going to proceed because it's one of the stories that intrigue me, and it's my YouTube channel. We're going to start with Captain Luther Meservey, Meservey. Luther was born in 1834 in St. George, Maine. His father was William. His mother was Hannah. Luther was fourth of their 7 children, 3 boys and 4 girls. Luther married Sarah Ann Andrews on October 17, 1862, also in St. George, Maine. Now, Sarah Ann was born on the 28th of October, 1840, also in St. George, to John and Eliza. She was 5th of her parents' children. They had 4 boys and 3 girls. I don't know anything about their childhood, their growing up life, how they met, where they met. Assumedly, they were in St. George, Maine, but whatever. But they grew up and got married. Now, Luther and Sarah settled in a little village called Tennant's Harbor, Maine. Luther had become a sea captain, and he was usually gone for short voyages, leaving Sarah home alone. Most reports list them as childless. I did find one record that showed Luther was the father of 6 children, but they all had birthdays after Sarah's death date. So either it's a family mix-up, because he did have a brother with a similar name, or a second marriage that I didn't find a record for. But anyway, Captain Luther and Sarah had a home on the coast and friends in the village, but Tennant's Harbor was a small, remote area. It was populated by 50 or 60 families, and they made their livings by fishing or as sailors. And they were all related by blood or marriage or both. Most of the 50 to 60 families were related somehow. Most of the homes in Tennant's Harbor were far enough away that if you liked urban lifestyle, this would not be the place for you to retire. It was said of the area that people with sensitive constitutions or people who didn't like to be alone probably would have hated living there. It was kind of a perfect fit for Captain Luther and Sarah, however. Sarah was described as a beautiful lady with a good figure, large brown eyes, and deep blonde hair, and it seems that she was liked by her neighbors and the people in the village. In October of 1877, Captain Luther was scheduled to set sail again for a trip that would keep him out until after Christmas of that year. So 3-4-ish months. As his departure approached, he reportedly pondered the dangers of leaving his beautiful wife to her own devices for the course of the winter. Not that his life on the sea was without its own dangers, and he was kind of comparing the two, I suppose. Part of his preparations to leave would have been to go into town to clear up any balances they owed in the stores and make sure that his wife had a prepaid account or line of credit to purchase the things that she needed while he was away. He probably also would have left her some cash money. While neither Captain Luther or Sarah relished the months away from each other, Sarah was not a shrieking violet and was known to be hardy enough to survive the winter without her husband. And the first few months of Captain Luther's voyage on his schooner, the Bickmore, went on without any unexpected events. Sarah's quiet life went on as usual as well. On the evening of December 22nd, 1877, Sarah and a neighbor girl named Clara, it was spelled 2 ways, went into the village to collect the mail from the post office. It was Sarah's habit to let the mail collect for a few days and then get it all at once. She did not go to the post office every day. This trip to the post office was not a particularly noteworthy event in and of itself, except that time would tell that it was the last time Sarah would be seen alive. Days and weeks went on without Sarah returning to town for mail or any other supplies. No one really seemed worried. In this tiny town where everyone knew everyone and probably everyone knew everyone's business, no one was curious about why Sarah hadn't been seen. None of the reportedly familial people were worried, and Sarah was supposedly one of the most well-liked and well-respected women in the village, and she was basically absent. And it went on that way until the end of January, when the postmaster noticed that Sarah's mail was piling up more than it had before. So the postmaster is having conversations with people among the town, and on January 29th of 1878, Albion Meservey, who happened to be Captain Luther's cousin, approached Whitney Long, the town burgomaster, that's the German word for mayor, with concerns that Sarah hadn't been seen, nor had she visited anyone for quite some time. And he said that maybe somebody should investigate. Someone? Not him or any of the other, air quote, your family? Whatever, the mayor's supposed to send somebody to investigate. So there was apparently some kind of discussion because the mayor and Albion were accompanied by another resident named Frederick Hart, and they decided they would go to Sarah's house and investigate. When they got to the house, all of the window shades were down, and the house was unnaturally cold and silent. They found all of the doors locked, but there was a back window that could be pried open. Now, who knows what these men might have been expected to find when they climbed into the house, but they could not have been prepared for what they did find. Nothing unusual was found as they entered the house, but when they entered the spare bedroom, the whole thing changed. The room was a disaster. Everything was covered in bloodstains. The furniture was overturned in a state of disarray, words are hard, and lying on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, was the dead body of Sarah Meservey. The scene in the room signified that her death had been a particularly violent one. Her body was covered in bruises and wounds that suggested a desperate struggle. Her arms had been pulled down behind her head and tied with a fishing line. Then she was strangled with her own scarf. She was fully dressed and still wore her walking boots. This indicated to those who began the investigation that she was assaulted or attacked the day she last went to the post office. She still had her outdoor shoes on. That was a month before. That was 3 days before Christmas, and now we're a month past Christmas. Blood was also found in the kitchen on the door and in the sink, indicating to the investigators that the killer had washed their hands there in Sarah's home. Bound near Sarah's body was a barely literate note. There were many grammar and spelling errors, and some words were deciphered completely by context clues. And it read, "I came as a woman, she was out, and I waited till she come back, not for money, but I killed her." Many spelling errors, many grammar errors. Near the note, there were also some used matches. It seemed that the burglar was using the matches to search the home instead of lighting a candle or a lantern, but they were not the same matches that were used in the Meservey home, and they were unusual to the area in general. The matches found were a British-style match. I don't know what that means. I couldn't find pictures. The sheriff looked into harbor records to see if any British ships had been in the area at the time of Sarah's death, but there were no records of any British ships docking then. The sheriff then kept the details of the matches closely guarded. He intuitively knew that this was an important clue. Investigators also found a crumpled, bloody paper collar, presumably worn and torn off the killer during the struggle. So in the 1800s, paper collars, we will call them dickies, like, they're the top half of a shirt that goes under a vest or a sweater or something. Well, they had these collars, a men's shirt collar, made out of a heavy paper that were worn once and thrown away. So this is what they found then, and it was torn off and it was bloody. So even though that appeared that there was nothing missing from the home, the investigators had no way of knowing if Sarah had any money and how much had been taken at the time. So the working hypothesis became that Sarah had interrupted a burglar on her return from the post office, who then overpowered and killed her. They determined that the note that was left behind was a bad attempt to mislead whoever found Sarah. The note seemed to be telling police that the killer came dressed as a woman. Sarah was gone. They waited for her to return and killed her, but not for money. They just killed her. There was, in fact, a postmortem completed on Sarah, and among the things we already talked about, the evidence noted was that the fishing line that was used to tie her hands was hardly unique in the town, but it was proof that it was the knot was a sailor knot. It also had evidence that Sarah had tried to bite through that fishing cord. The scarf used to strangle her was tied also in a fisherman's knot, another indication that they were dealing with somebody local. The paper collar found gave an indication of the size of the killer, but they were so incredibly common that they were not easily traced or discernible one from another. Now, 3 weeks after Sarah's dead body was found, Captain Luther's schooner returned to shore in Bath. and Luther decided he would stop here and buy his sweet wife a couple of trinkets, completely unaware of what waited for him at home. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, I don't know which, he ran into a neighbor from Tennant's Harbor and was told of his wife's murder. Devastated, he hired a coach and rushed home to prove that no, this can't possibly be happening, right? He ran home hoping that it was not true. Now, Luther and Sarah were reportedly a very deeply devoted couple, and when Captain Luther learned that the gruesome truth was in fact a reality, he could not be persuaded to enter his home. He would not go inside. He said that there was nothing there for him anymore. When asked, Captain Luther said he had no idea who might have done something so brutal. He did confirm to police that Sarah had been left with plenty of money to support her while he was away. He also told the police that they had a secret hiding place for some emergency cash. So the wash basin cabinet in the spare room where Sarah was killed had a hidden drawer, and in that drawer they hid their money. So a police officer was sent in, and the drawer was found intact with all of its money still inside. Luther did tell the police that before he left his wife with about $200 cash money. And that would be worth almost $5,900 today. So not a small sum. On February 19th, one of the Meservey neighbors, Mrs. Levi Hart, received a very strange letter. It was very poorly written, just as the note that was left by Sarah's body. And this letter had a postmark from Philadelphia, and it read, quote, "I thought I would drop you a line to tell your husband to be careful how he conducted things about Tennant's Harbor, 'cause if he don't, he and a good many others of the men will get an ounce ball put through them tell them that it is no use to catch this chap, for he will not be caught. So be careful who you take up in St. George. You shall hear from me again in 3 months." End quote. And it was signed D.M. All inquiries into the identification of D.M. failed to reveal who he might be. But there was something about this second note. The county sheriff, Sheriff Lowe, asked to see both notes again. He was sure that the handwriting from the second note matched the handwriting from the first note, the one found near Sarah's beaten body. And he was right. And lucky for them, residing in St. George was a noted handwriting expert. He was a grammar teacher and penmanship teacher and an expert in handwriting. And he happened to live right there in Tennant Harbor, and he was a man named Alvin R. Dunton, D-U-N-T-O-N. Naturally, local gossip was a thing. We don't know how or why gossip starts. In this case, there was not a lot of information on the town's interactions with each other. There was no record of feuds or fisticuffs or deep-seated hatreds. But suspicion against one of their neighbors began with a simple statement by Captain Albion Meservey to another man named Deacon Long. Quote, "I have been talking with Irene this morning. What if it was Nathan who done it?" And with that, the whole town, fixed on one man as the likely killer of Sarah Meservey. And because the 1870s weren't a time for slow justice, on March 8th, he was arrested. Now, the accused killer-burglar was another sea captain named Nathan Hart, who was Captain Luther and Sarah's nearest neighbor. Nathan was described as a pretty hard character, but other than that vague description, it's hard to say why many people were willing to believe he was the murderer. There was a little something, though. A little something. You see, when the police believed that the murderer was really an interrupted burglary, and they were convinced it was somebody local, they began watching the people of Tennant's Harbor. They were watching for anyone who was suddenly flush with cash. someone who was spending more money than usual, or paying off debts suddenly. And over time, that watching and waiting was productive. So you remember Mrs. Hart, who received the second letter? Her husband was Levi, and Levi had been part of a committee that the state attorney had been reporting the details of this crime to. And Levi was startled when in one of these meetings, the information that the police had been watching for unusual spending came out. He told the county attorney that he had noticed one young man in particular spending more money than he should have had. This young man was not known for his work ethic, but he was suddenly flush with cash that he claimed to have won in a card game. And who had he won this cash from? His stepfather, Nathan Hart. Oh, yeah. His stepfather just happened to have some money in their gambling, and now he's flush. So enter Alvin Dunton, the handwriting expert. After being asked by the police to look at both notes and a ship's log as a control sample, Alvin stated that without a doubt the handwriting from the two notes was the same, and they matched the ship log. The ship's log entries had been made by Nathan Hart when he was serving as Captain Albion Meservy's on Captain Albion Meservy's ship. Captain Albion Meservy, the cousin of Captain Luther, was married to Irene, Nathan Hart's sister. Are you noticing how these families are all intertwined? This is getting a little bit crazy. It's starting to feel like a family feud. So flimsy as this evidence might sound, because it is rather circumstantial, let's be honest. The sudden cash influx, the apparent matched handwriting, and the fact that Nathan used British matches in his house was enough for the grand jury to order that Nathan Hart stand trial for Sarah's murder. Not saying there's not some good reasons to investigate here, but it is still rather circumstantial. So, in May 1878, Nathan is still in prison, and another letter comes to one of the Tennant's Harbor citizens. This one was postmarked from Providence, Rhode Island, and it was addressed to a Mrs. Mahala Sweetland. The letter was very long, like several thousand words long, and I won't read it all here. I will link it in the sources down below, and the link will say letter. Anyway, in this several thousand-word letter, the killer explained that a long time ago he had gone with Sarah Meservy and had gotten fresh with her and received a slap in the face. He decided the night of the murder was the time to return to town to see if she had told anybody that he had made a pass at her. He planned to rob her and then burn down her house. The letter told in detail how he fought with Sarah, then strangled her with the scarf, and left the house with $1,100. That's a lot of money in 2024. That was a lot of money then, too, but it's a lot of money. That $1,100 would have probably been, gosh, if $200 was $5,900, do the math, because I'm not going to. Sheriff Lowell believed that this letter had been written by somebody else. Like, he did not think that this handwriting matched. But Alvin Dunton, the handwriting expert, he concluded that the same person wrote the third note that had written the first two. So naturally, it was determined that Nathan had to have written the letter in jail, then given it to his wife to mail. Now, because of this, he was not allowed to have any more visits with his wife, and the fact that no more letters arrived after this was considered proof that he had in fact been the letter writer. Another thing to note was that at the time of the grand jury investigation, neither Nathan nor his wife could say for sure where he was on December 22nd. So a trial began on October 1st, 1878. So this is going on a lot of months. Okay, Nathan's been sitting in jail for quite a while. There was a reporter in the courtroom who was not impressed with the defendant, describing him as, quote, wearing a smirk that gives his lips a crafty, treacherous cast that is not prepossessing. So nobody liked Nathan all of a sudden. The prosecution's case was this. Sarah's killer was skilled at tying maritime knots, and Nathan was a sailor. His proximity to Sarah's house gave him opportunity to know when she was absent. He attempted to rob her, and when she surprised him by her unexpected early arrival, Nathan felt he had no choice but to kill her. He had no alibi for the night of the murder. He showed evidence of knowing certain details about the murder before they were publicly revealed. For example, before the body was found, he told friends he had dreamed that Sarah was strangled to death. Surely a guilty conscience manifesting itself, right? A brother of Sarah, one of Sarah's brothers, recalled that on the day that Sarah's body was discovered, Nathan told him that he had known she was dead the whole time. So the state presented several handwriting experts who asserted the anonymous letters were in the defendant's handwriting. Nathan, they argued, wrote these letters and arranged to have them posted in various cities in an attempt to draw suspicion away from himself. A man named Warren Hart testified that a few months before the murder, he was joking with Nathan about women, and Nathan's wife mentioned an occasion where Sarah had slapped Nathan because he was too fresh, a little too frisky with her. Now, Nathan calmly and stubbornly continued to insist he was innocent. His demeanor was calm and kind of cheerful, which rubbed people the wrong way. At the trial, Nathan, his wife, and his stepdaughter all testified that they were positive Nathan had been home the night of the 22nd, and on December 24th, that he was visiting his granddaughter. So he could not have been around. He had an alibi. He said. And his defense attorney said their client did not write the letters. Various statements attributed to him could hardly be called proof. He couldn't, you can't. People say stuff is what they were saying. Mr. Whitehouse stated that he saw Nathan at his house around 8:30 the night of the murder. But most importantly, a witness changed his testimony. And that witness was Alvin Denton, and he was now testifying for the defense. You see, after testifying for the state's attorney at the grand jury, Alvin now believed he had been deliberately deceived when Captain Albion gave him the ship's log. Alvin now believed that Captain Albion had written the letters. You see, the log he had been given as a control had been written by two different people. And the first part of the log matched the notes and the letter. The second part of the log did not. Alvin now believed that the sample he was given was not written by Nathan. And even more, neither the notes nor the first part of the log matched Nathan's recent handwriting samples. Alvin became convinced that Nathan did not write the notes at the trial, he testified for the defense. Nathan Hart himself took the stand. He reiterated that he had been at home the evening Sarah was murdered. He stated that his dream about Sarah had taken place after her body was discovered. He denied he had been one of the ones to urge the searching of the home. He did not write the anonymous letters, and he did not know who had. He had nothing whatsoever to do with Sarah's death. And it kind of looks like, depending on how you feel about Nathan and Sarah, you could go either way. Either he's guilty or he's not. If you look at the evidence, you can read it either way. In his closing arguments, County Attorney Lindley Staples addressed the discrepancies in Nathan's testimony, and he maintained that Nathan was, quote, The only man in the county with the character, disposition, opportunity, courage, and requisite knowledge to have done the deed. End quote. Man, Nathan has a bad reputation. Before the murder, Nathan had a bad reputation. Holy cow. Anyways, the trial went on 6 days. And at the end of the 6 days, the jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Nathan was sentenced to life in prison. His lead attorney, J.H. Montgomery, had said in his closing arguments that should Nathan be sentenced to prison, he would make it his life's work to free him. However, no attempt was made to appeal the case. I don't know. It's a little fishy. Alvin Dunton was so distressed over his role in convicting a man that he now believed innocent that in 1882 he wrote a book titled The True Story of the Hart Messervy Murder Trial. And in it he described how Nathan Hart had been railroaded. In the book, he not only attempted to prove Nathan's innocence, but in no uncertain terms accused Captain Albion Messervy of murdering Sarah, writing the notes and deceiving him during his analysis. The book also indicted nearly everyone in the trial. Sheriff Lowe, the county attorney, Nathan's attorney, even 14-year-old Kara, who had testified to having seen Sarah the day she was murdered. Alvin said that Kara could not be trusted, and the reason was because later in her life she'd been accused of, or later, sometime between when he wrote the book and Sarah's murder, Kara had been accused of trying to poison a rival for her boyfriend's affections. So apparently Kara was a little suspicious. I don't know. Those mentioned in the book bought as many copies as they could in an attempt to keep it out of circulation in Tennant's Harbor. They were literally trying to buy the truth or hide the truth. I don't know. And Captain Albion actually sued Alvin for libel. He sought $20,000 in damages, and he was awarded just under $1,900. But he never collected because Professor Dunton moved to Boston. Alvin continued to accuse Captain Albion of murder. Captain Albion sued again and was awarded another about $1,700 and never collected that amount either. Nathan Hart died in prison of malignant jaundice 5 years after his sentencing. But legend in Tennant's Harbor says he actually died from eating a poisoned cake that a mysterious woman brought to him in prison. More than 50 years after the trial, Nathan's attorney decided to reveal the, quote, facts of the case. He said that Nathan Hart had actually murdered Sarah. He didn't intend to kill her, just to choke her into submission. Nobody, hardly anybody, in Tennant's Harbor believed that story. Most likely, or people mostly believe, I guess, that Nathan Hart was guilty. Like, it seems like most people believe that he was guilty, or at the time believed he was guilty. But it's not a universal belief. Like, a lot of people who have done research and stuff on it question the whole thing. And the Hart Messervy murder remains one of Maine's most unusual, unsolved murder cases. I am going to play both sides of the coin here. First, let's talk about Nathan having done it. Okay. He lived close enough to tell that Sarah was gone. He knew her husband was out to sea, like everybody else in town. He had an awful, horrible reputation of being, just a terrible human being, it sounds like. And I don't know, I couldn't find anything that said he had that reputation before the accusations or not. But based on the prosecution's closing statements, it seems like he kind of had that reputation in general. But then you add to the fact that the matches matched, like he had the British matches, and that his stepson was all of a sudden flush with cash that he won off of him in a card game. So that's a pretty substantial circumstantial evidence. I mean, there's no DNA, there's none of that stuff, right? But playing the flip side of that coin, okay, Captain Albion, the cousin of Captain Luther, and the brother-in-law to Nathan, certainly is just as likely a candidate as Nathan. Captain Albion supplied the ship's log to the handwriting expert and claimed the portion that he was giving him was Nathan's handwriting. I don't know. I feel like that vastly outweighs anything else. Especially when you consider that the first part of the ship's log, of Captain Albion's ship's log, did match the letters, and it was presumably Captain Albion's handwriting. You know, not very many people aboard a ship are going to have control of that log. It's going to be the captain and his designated note taker. And who would he have trusted to do that but his brother-in-law, right? I don't know. I feel like you really could, without positive, like, eyewitness, forensic evidence, that kind of thing, you could really make a case for either man having committed this murder. It is really, really unusually outstanding. So, I do have pictures, but I don't have a picture of Luther or Sarah. Weirdly enough, this is a sketch of the home, and you can see in the top right-hand corner, that is the guest room where Sarah was found. The next is a picture of Alvin, the handwriting expert. The next picture is a picture of Nathan. But how come there's no pictures of Sarah and Luther? Like, I could not find anything. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed our story. I have a couple of other videos here I think you would like as well. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. Click that little button. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me which man you think did the crime. Leave me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and have a really fabulous day.